Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King, joined by our publisher, Ronnie Sanders, and a couple returning guests back on the show to talk about the Iron Bowl this week. We got Tommy Bowden on again and Mr. Randy Campbell, as there's a bunch of anniversaries. Randy, we talked about it when we had you on the show recently, but everyone's going to want to talk about the 2013 game. Obviously 1983, and Tommy, the 1993 Iron Bowl now is coming up on its anniversary. Does it feel like it's been that long since y'all had that game?
It really does. It's been a long time. I just had my 25th reunion of the undefeated Tulane team, and those guys were in their 40s. And I can remember originally coaching at Auburn, and Randy was a player. And, it's been it's been forever. And speaking of Randy real quick, Randy was he was the Johnny Manziel of that era back there. Had he been in today's offenses, he'd be like the guy, Patrick Mahomes. He was a magician with the ball and running skills.
Oh, man.
But, it's been a while. It just doesn't seem like it's been that long. But, man, I don't think it's been that long until I look in the mirror and see how old I'm getting.
Talk a little bit about the transition. I mean, you're both there in 92, and then Coach Dye stepped down, and then Tommy, your brother, came on. Talk about a little bit about, how that, both of you, how that worked and how.
Well, Coach Dye had left some really good players, and Terry, I think Stephen Davis, in my last year, 92, Coach Dye's last year was ineligible, and he was signed, I believe, as a Proposition 48. That he was eligible, I think, Terry's first year, but he had left some really good players, and there's a lot of turmoil. Coach Dye's uncertainty that last year, players probably lost focus, and then. But when Terry came in, kind of redirected, gave us a vision, and had a really good staff, Ronnie, and some really good players. And it was just a perfect storm, really. It was ineligible is kind of what Michigan's doing right now, us against the world, best team nobody saw on TV. So really talented team, but it seemed like all the elements that you needed were there, and just nobody saw us.
Yeah, I remember after the 92 season, when I knew I wasn't going to be kept on the staff, I think Nancy and I and Daltman and his wife and another couple went out to dinner. We were talking, and we decided, well, let's just write down on a napkin what we think Auburn's record will be next year in 93. And, I think what did we go, Tommy? 5-5-1 in 92, I think's what it was.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And, so, somebody writes down, 4-7, another guy writes down 6-5, and I wrote down 9-2, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, guys, look, we've got really good players coming back next year. I said, this year we just had a couple weird things happen in games that, we could talk about. The end of the Georgia game was crazy. The Ole Miss game, Arkansas game. I mean, there were just some weird things that happened, but, there were some great players on that 93 team. And I'll tell you what, and watching the season in 93, Tommy on offense and Terry, I mean, they did a great job of just the game plans and the offensive schemes. I mean, it was a beautiful thing to watch that year. I felt like everybody we played was off balance. They didn't know what we were going to
do. Randy, the other thing is the position, of course, that you played, but it always helps when you have a veteran quarterback. Yeah. Stan White was there. He'd been through, he was an experienced, been thrown in the fire a whole bunch. So having an experienced signal caller was really, really helpful too. And just another piece of the puzzle that really made it complete.
Yeah.
And then you talked about the staff, of course, Jimbo was a quarterback coach, Rodney Allison coached running backs, Rick Trickett on the offensive line. I believe Rodney Gardner was maybe coaching tight ends. Rodney, you might, I think he was. And then, so we had a really good staff, and then, to come in one of them staff meetings with Jimbo and Trickett's vocabulary, you had to be at least 21 to come in the staff meeting to come in. But, and of course, Wayne Hall on defense, and that defensive staff was veteran. So really, all the elements were there.
We walked into a staff meeting one day after practice at LSU, and you remember that staff, same guys, and Nick and Jimbo and Trickett, and Nick looked at Jimbo and told him he needed to watch his language.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed his swear jar is overflowing now at Tuscaloosa.
No doubt. Talk a little bit about play calling that year. I mean, you were calling the plays in 92. How'd that change in 92?
Terry had always been a play caller and really came in and took the reins, which is, prerogative as a head coach. But he had married an offense, I formation, so long under my father, and really had great offensive line, I formation personnel. Coach Dye was an I formation guy, and just fullbacks, just some of the players, fullbacks, tight ends are really better on offensive line, experienced quarterback. So Terry being a play call in an I formation, which he'd been in with it so long. I say he was young, but I mean as a play caller at Salem and Sanford, when the defense stopped something, there was always an answer in the I formation, whether it be a toss sweep and a reverse off a toss sweep, or a counter off a toss sweep, or a sprint draw pass. So it was a really nice complete package, and Terry had known it for so long and just did an excellent job. I'd pipe in occasionally. Jimbo was always going to pipe in. He's about 24 years old, but he would always pipe in. And Rick Trickett would just sit there and listen, but always make great adjustments. So it was a great environment for Terry, but he was a really good play caller.
Randy, when you when you got out, obviously, and I mean, did you obviously you saw the talent there? What was the difference between 92 and in 93? Obviously, I mean, Coach Dye was at the end of the run, but what did Terry do to kind of change things?
I mean, I'm not really sure, I'm not being there and being in any of the meetings or anything like that. I'm not really sure, other than what I said about being very innovative on offense and just keeping people off balance. But, going the 92 season, I can comment on it, and I've pretty much touched on it already. I felt like we should have been 9-2 in 92. We lost to Alabama. They won the national championship and went undefeated that year. And we lost to Florida in Gainesville, but we should have won the other games that we lost and the one we tied. And, I'd have to get into the reasons why in each game, but we were, all those games were close, and it just seemed like the ball would bounce the wrong way. Like I'll give you one example. Tommy was in the press box. He was calling the plays. I was on the sideline sending the plays in, and we had the ball on, I think, Georgia's 2-yard line at the end of the game against Georgia with 17 seconds to go in the game. So we called 2 plays and sent them in. And the first play, the player at left halfback, we didn't really know at the time, but he busted an assignment, knocks the ball out of the fullback's hands. The ball goes on the ground, and we got it back, but the officials never spotted the ball. So we literally ran one play in 17 seconds and never got to run the other play. But those kind of things happened, something similar to that happened several times that year. So I don't know. I guess, sometimes you could say change is always good, and having a fresh set of eyes and players being inspired by a whole new staff coming in, and everybody's, got an opportunity to win a position and those type things. And I think everything just kind of came together for them in 93. And it was a fun time to be a fan and watch it.
Randy, going all the way back, I mean, back in 1982 season, I mean, it had been there in the state of Alabama. It had been complete, dominance by the Crimson Tide. I think, was it 9 in a row in the Iron Bowl before that year? Mm-hmm. Just talk about that. I mean, obviously it was an incredible game for you guys to pull it out there in that one. Talk about that feeling, really, just in the state of ending that losing streak and feeling like you guys were maybe turning in a different direction at that point and finally beating Alabama after 9 years.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts really on that. The first one is, Alabama kind of ran up and down the field on us that game. I don't know how many yards they had on offense, but it was a lot. And we probably had the lowest offensive production of any game that year. I think we only had 260-something yards in that game. But in 1982, we led the nation in fewest turnovers. We only had 14, which was number one in the nation. And it proved to be the difference in that game. We had one fumble that we lost after the game was already 23-22 with us ahead. It was at the very end of the game. But Alabama had 3 turnovers. Bob Harris intercepted 2 passes, and then they had one fumble, and that was really the difference in the game. So I think we went into that game fairly confident. We had almost beaten Georgia 2 weeks before, and they were undefeated. I don't know if they were ranked 1 or 2 in the country, but it was at Auburn, and we played them. We were inside their 10-yard line at the end of the game, down by 5, and we just couldn't score the touchdown to win it. But I think playing that good against a team of that quality really gave us some confidence. And then in 82, it was almost like we didn't really worry about, how many yards we got or how many they got. It was just, we're going to do whatever it takes to win the game. And a lot of big plays in that game. But the second thought is, after the game, you just felt like the whole world had been lifted off your shoulders. I mean, to see, we came back out on the field, and the field was completely packed with Auburn fans. Everywhere you turned, it was chaos, but it was great chaos. Everybody was so happy, and just to see the faces on the Auburn fans after that victory was something I'll never forget.
Tommy, talk a little bit about '93 and the Alabama game. And I mean, I was there. I know everybody was, but I was actually there. And it wasn't on TV. And I remember, trailing at halftime, and crowd was nuts. Second time the Alabama game had been played in Jordan-Hare. Talk a little bit about Frank Sanders and Pat Nix and the whole situation there.
I can remember, I believe, of course, Frank was the flanker, the Z, whatever the letter that they give, but he always was lined up off the line to the wide side of the field. 75% of the time the ball's on the hash. It's a little different than the pros. It's a little more designated on which areas of the field to attack because of where the hashes are. But I think Antonio Langham was the Alabama corner. It's kind of mirroring him. But Antonio would go out and line up to the wide side of the field with the ball on the hash. That's where Frank was coming most of the time. And I can remember when Stan went down, we had some time, and injured Patrick Nix was fixing to come in. And Terry and I were talking, and we decided to put Frank into the boundary and throw a takeoff. It's a shorter throw for Patrick, coming in cold as far as a boundary throw, as opposed one to way out there to the numbers to the wide side of the field. So maybe he can do it more accurate with it. And then maybe we might get Frank, hooked up with a lesser corner. I'm sure they were both talented. I'm pretty sure it's Antonio Langham. But we put Frank in the boundary, and I remember being in the press box. Antonio Langham just went out there and lined up to the wide side of the field, waiting for Frank to come out. And then they saw Frank in the boundary. He ran halfway over, and he saw he wasn't going to make it, so he ran back and couldn't make it. And Patrick, being his father, being a high school coach and being a smart guy, he said, "Man, just don't throw it out of bounds. Don't overthrow it. Make it a jump ball." And that's exactly what he did. He could not have thrown the ball any better. Frank, being a great receiver, very competitive, instinctive player, made a high point catch with the ball, attacked at his highest point, and the rest was history. But with Patrick Nix and Frank Sanders, and just the design of the play and trying to figure it out, and thank goodness, it was Stan White stayed down a little bit, so we could discuss this on the phone. Terry and I kind of going through the possibilities and how to scheme Frank against Antonio Langham.
What kind of crowd was there that day?
That's the people. You coach. I coached for 32 years, and you get some great environments. I've been up in Ohio State, I've been in Notre Dame, Florida State, to Florida State, Miami, Duke, Carolina, Clemson, South Carolina. But the one rivalry, and I can remember that environment in that game, walking out of the dressing room, and I felt like you could cut the electricity when you walked out from underneath the tunnel and walked into, I guess, the early crowd, the everybody on top of each other. It was a different thickness in the air and a different excitement. And that to me, and there's some great rivalries, but the most cold-blooded to me, a throat-slitting rivalry was Alabama Auburn. It's just, and I couldn't say that I was a head coach at Clemson, because the Clemson South Carolina is a great rivalry. and your head coach up there, and you need to talk that one up, which I did. And it's great, but that one is you don't go to slice the wrist, you go to cut the jugular on that one, and it's just really But that game, the electricity, I've never felt anything like it before. Maybe the design of the stadium, maybe the way the air stayed in there, I don't know, but it was very unique. It's at least anything I had experienced in 32 years of coaching.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've been like you. I've been a part of a lot of rivalries, Florida State, and a lot of them.
Of course, Randy, just quickly, I was on the other end. That daggone Alabama undefeated when I was coaching, going into Auburn for the first time ever when Bear Bryant said, we will never play at the Cow College. We'll never go in that stadium. The legislator got involved and voted it in. I happened to be on the undefeated Alabama team that went in there and got beat by Auburn. Another great electricity, but I've been on both ends of the spectrum of some great experiences in the same stadium on both sides.
And you were there for the first 2 times that game was played in Auburn.
Yeah. I remember. I remember that first one because we were undefeated. You show how significant that game is to Alabama and Auburn fans. We were undefeated, lost the game, and 3 weeks later we were headed to Kentucky. Unemployed. So there's a lot on the line in that game.
No doubt. No question.
For all you guys, I mean, back in '93, how many Auburn fans made because it was streamed in Bryant-Denny, correct? Or not, obviously streamed is the wrong word, but at the time. But how many Auburn fans made that trip over there?
Oh, I wouldn't. Randy might have an idea. I wouldn't know.
It was the joke going around was that they sold out 2 stadiums. It was closed circuit. Closed circuit. I guess it was Tuscaloosa or Birmingham one, but
yeah, and and I was when I went to I had a chance to experience that Alabama-Auburn game in Birmingham where it split 50-50. That's just another unique environment. Randy, did you play in Birmingham split 50-50?
Yeah.
That's just a great environment. I mean, man, it's hard to explain what that environment's like in that rivalry, and it's a very unique rivalry.
It was a lot like Florida, Georgia, more intense. But in Jacksonville, it's 50-50 in that game.
It's 50-50, but the fans, when they leave, half stay in Florida and half go to Georgia, and that's what makes it unique. Ohio State, Michigan this week's going to be the same way. Game's over, half stay in Michigan, half go to Ohio State, go back to Ohio. But in this one, they're neighbors, and man, I tell you what, and it's around. They'll be stealing Christmas lights and knocking Santas over after that game. It's just they work beside them 365 days a year in the same work environment, or it's different, and to me it's similar to the Egg Bowl, which is going to be Thanksgiving between Mississippi and Mississippi State. There's just usually a lot more at stake between Alabama and Auburn, and it's a bigger, more fanatical fan base.
We were talking about it, guys, before we got rolling, about how probably all will be forgiven. I mean, it's not like you'll forget a huge upset against New Mexico State, but I mean, if Auburn goes out there and wins the Iron Bowl, obviously that's gonna be the memorable moment of Hugh Freeze in year one. I guess for both of you guys, how much is that week of preparation and that week and the environment and the buildup? How much is it just separate from any other game and kind of feel different than any other game that season?
Randy, why don't you do it from a player's perspective since you played, and I might do it from a coaching perspective.
I think from a player's perspective, the game seems to be so much bigger than every other game because of how many people are interested in it. So I kind of think from a coach's perspective, I think you have to try to keep your players' emotions under control and maybe not build it up. Almost it's like you have to think reverse, because the one thing you don't want to do is get in the game and be tight and make mistakes early in the game, that cause you to get in a position where you can't catch up or compete. But it was a great game to play, and there's some stories about it I wish I could tell you, but it's probably not rated for this podcast. Some of the things are, said on the field during the game, but just a great rivalry, and I appreciate the opportunity of getting to play in it.
Randy, talk a little bit about 1983 versus 1993. You know, 83, you're about to win the first SEC championship, and you know, Auburn's second ever SEC championship. And fast forward, 10 years, and Auburn's won what, 4 SEC championships, and things look a lot different versus Alabama than they did 10 years earlier.
Yeah, the 83 game was very, very different from 82, simply because our goals were even bigger. And when we beat Georgia and Athens in 83, we were guaranteed at least a share of the SEC championship. So that was locked up. And, we really at that point were, Coach Dye, I remember him saying, we don't want to share it with anybody. But we had, in 83, we were favored probably for the first time in over 10 years to win the game. And we felt like, we had a lot of confidence. We were playing really good at the end of the season. And, we expected to win the game. And we were, thinking about Sugar Bowl and whatever implications that might have on the national championship picture. But just really a very different mindset. 82, it was more of, here we are, David going in to try to slew Goliath, and in 83, it was all business-like. Let's go in, take care of business, play our game. Don't care what they do. We just pay attention to what we do.
Randy, one of the things I remember, one of the biggest surprises after coaching there in 80 and coaching the running backs, and the year before I got there, had James Brooks and Andrews and James left. I had James Brooks. And then a guy named Sam DeJarnette played a little bit there. And Sam's a strong Christian guy. And I think Coach Dye came in, and I think some of the intensity of those practices ran Sam over the Southern Miss, where he was a great player. But I remember a guy, I got there, and most of those guys were already signed. A little guy named Lionel James. Yeah. And I'm saying, wait a minute. I come here and I would coach running backs at Auburn. Who is this little guy? I mean, about 5'8", 5'7", 165 pounds back in as a freshman. He was always just kind of hanging around, never got in much while I was there. Yeah. But one of the biggest surprises is a guy like Lionel James and what he did for that team, and the change of pace when he came in and got the ball. How tall would you say he was?
I think he was 5'6".
Yeah. I was trying to give him an inch to 5'7", trying to make him as tall. I was trying to make him as tall as Terry.
Yeah.
But man, he was a good player. And
Lionel was a great player. He's a great player, great human being, just great at practice, and team captain, leader. He was just everything you would want. And dynamite comes in small packages, he used to say.
Yeah, no kidding. But and Randy touched on earlier about the week before that 83 game, week before the 93 game, about and Randy's so right. You don't want to the guy. You don't have to do much to motivate him. Their players are going to be highly motivated. And I always heard the statement says, don't play the game on Wednesday, and don't play the game on Thursday. You don't want intensity. I remember going to my first head coaching job, going to Tulane, and one of our biggest booster kind of supported the program, was watching one of our Thursday practices. And we were just kind of walking through assignments, trying to get execution down and walking through scripted situations. And he leaned over by the side of me. He says, man, them guys ain't going very hard. I said, you want me to play the game today, or you want me to play it on Saturday? I said, which day you want me to play? And that's kind of like that, the week of that game. Boy, you don't want to go up and lose all your emotion on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You want to peak at kickoff on Saturday. And what Randy mentioned there was really important from a coaching perspective.
The last time Randy was on last week, we talked a little bit about recognizing some of Auburn's national championships, because been a lot of undefeated years. And obviously 83, there was one loss, but a lot of people think Auburn should recognize that team. 93. How do you feel about that? I mean, they're obviously being on probation, couldn't make it to the SEC championship game, but how as a staff and as a team, how did y'all view that?
You mean 93?
93.
You don't think much about until later, and I see more so. I think disappointment about a lot of the players that played on the 93 team, because they were on probation, because it wasn't televised, because they weren't up to legally the SEC championship. They felt like as years went by, they might have been, forgotten a little bit. Coaching, you don't think much about it. You go to other places, you got bigger yards to cut than that. What happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever. But I think some of the Auburn players, from what I have just read, I'm not talking to any of them, but going back and seeing some of the recognition of some of the other teams and how they might feel a little bit slighted. A lot of great teams at Auburn, and that was surely one of them. Who's to say it wasn't one of the best? But I feel some of the players' frustration a little bit. But coaching, you get going, man. You got other issues at other schools. I know that ring we got in '83 was. I designed my Tulane undefeated ring off of that '93 ring. It was a great design. I don't know who designed it, Terry and somebody, but I copied that, and it was a great team.
Well, guys, I know y'all got to go, but Nathan, do you have one more question?
No, I was going to say, this was a great show, and I know Auburn fans everywhere really appreciate both of y'all's, obviously everything y'all done for the program, but y'all's perspective on the Iron Bowls and everything else. We really appreciate you guys being on.
Great
Tommy,
being on, seeing Randy again.
Yeah, Tommy, I'm going to give him credit for this. I'll tell you a real quick story, but I think he invented the back shoulder throw in college football that some people have made a living off of. And I'll tell you why I believe that is when Tommy was the offensive coordinator at Auburn in '92, and I got there to coach quarterbacks. And early on in practice, we were throwing a deep ball, and I was telling Stan what I had been taught from 10 years old all the way through playing and all the way through coaching. I said, look, on a deep ball, you got to throw it over the outside shoulder. That way, either our guy gets it or nobody gets it. And somewhere early in fall practice, Tommy came up to me and said, we don't want to do that. I said, what do you mean? He said, tell him to throw it up so it gives Frank Sanders a chance to out-jump the defensive guy and go up and get it. And it was foreign to me. I was scared to death to tell the quarterback to do that. But then I trusted Tommy, and Frank Sanders is, one of the best receivers Auburn's ever had, I guess, in the history of our football program. But that was the beginning of the back shoulder throw.
It's funny because and I've worked so many years with my father, and one of the worst things you can do is throw a deep ball out of bounds or overthrow it.
Yeah,
and people forget that receivers work 3 hours a day catching the ball. Defensive backs work 5 to 10 minutes catching the ball. They work on formation adjustments. They work on tackling. They work on motion adjustments. They work on blitz package. They work on all that stuff. And throw it up, give them a chance. And thank goodness Randy was coachable. But great seeing Randy again. And like I said, there's some great times at Auburn. I have great memories. And my wife says if I ever pass away, she's moving back to Auburn. She still has friends there. So we enjoy getting back there. It's a great experience and just a great college football environment.
Yep. Great to see you too, Tommy.
It's good to see both.
Thank y'all so much.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Same to y'all.
Thank you.